One of the areas that I would like for to be able to share on video is a work that we had done some time ago, called in an ebook format, called "The Person and Work of Jesus Christ in Each Book of the Old Testament, Seen in its New Testament Application and Fulfillment." And we've entitled it "An Emmaus Walk." And I'd like to go back and review that and look at that, because I truly believe in each book of the Hebrew Bible, we do see Christ revealed, especially if we think of it in terms of an Emmaus walk, and how Jesus on the road to Emmaus opened up the Hebrew scriptures around himself, beginning in the Torah of Moses, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings. And so I would like to track that through New Testament thinking, New Testament application, and try to follow that Emmaus walk of our Lord. It is my deep conviction that Christ was the divine rabbi that opened the door so that those disciples could understand and follow what the Lord was actually saying, and how you find him in the Hebrew scriptures. So I would like to begin with an introduction and then go right to Genesis and begin looking at each book of the Hebrew Bible. One of the greatest moments of biblical history occurred on a dusty ancient road that led to a small village about 7 miles outside of Jerusalem called Emmaus. Jesus Christ appeared and walked alongside 2 of his despondent followers soon after they saw him perish on a cross. As they walked, he began to boldly interpret the Hebrew scriptures, placing himself directly into the Torah, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings, in the threefold division of the Hebrew Bible. In these chapters, and in, I should say, these videos, I will touch on each of these Old Testament sections and highlight the Christological moments contained therein. It is my hope and prayer that I can illuminate Jesus Christ as the center of both the Old and the New Testament, the perfect culmination of God's act of creation and the great incarnation of Jesus Christ, the God-man. So we begin with the book of Genesis, and we might entitle this first emphasis or first point, Christ, the agent of creation. We begin appropriately enough at the very first moment, before time, as we know it today, could even be measured, the moment when God spoke the universe into existence. The opening phrases of the great book of Genesis contain important milestones along the biblical path that leads to the Mashiach, to the Messiah. In Genesis 1:1, it reads in Hebrew, Bereshit bara Elohim et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz. That is, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I believe John refers to these specific words as he develops the Christology in the first verses of the gospel, beginning with the phrase, I'm speaking of John, the Gospel of John, en arche ein chalagas. In the beginning was the Word. The Septuagint reads, in arche, apoiesin, theos, that is, God made the heaven and the earth. So we have the same phraseology, in arche, in the beginning. The translation of the Hebrew bereshit, in the beginning. So John is making the forceful and radical point in the New Testament that Jesus Christ is eternal, existing from the beginning before the material universe came to be. He was face to face with God, and he was fully divine and equal with God the Father, fully equal. That's what we find in the Greek of the first verse of John 1:1. En arche ein halagos, kai halagos ein pros ton theon, kai theos ein halagos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was face to face with God, and the Word was divine, or was God. We are further told in verse 3 of John that all things were made by him. The Greek reads panta di autou agenita, that is, all things came into being from him, as John continues, and without him came not one thing into being that has come into being. So John is clearly referring to Genesis 1 here, and the scriptures tell us that God speaks in Genesis. For example, it says, Vayomer Elohim in Hebrew, and God said. And I believe, as I've said in other videos, that Jesus Christ is being seen as the King, as the transcendent sovereign in Genesis chapter 1, calling creation into being by speaking. In John, Jesus Christ is that eternal Word, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, and he is the agent through which God the Father created the world. It is also interesting that in Genesis 1, the Hebrew reads, Yehi or, God said, let there be light, in 1:3. John tells us that Jesus Christ is the eternal light that shines in the darkness, and that the darkness could not take it down. Ukatelevin, that is, could not mug it. So Jesus Christ, the light referred to in both Genesis and John, we are told continues to shine because of the resurrection and the ultimate victory over sin and over darkness. In this sense, John sees the light created in Genesis as foreshadowing Christ's direct intervention in history, culminating in his own death and resurrection and glorious continual shining of that divine light. John uses the word in an interesting way in the Greek, the word logos, for Jesus Christ in the first chapter of his gospel, knowing that it would remind his readers, especially his Jewish readers, of the Aramaic word memra, M-E-M-R-A. The word memra means word in Aramaic, and it is interesting that in the Aramaic Targum Yerushalmi, that is the Jerusalem Targum, an Aramaic translation of the Bible, the word memra is used interchangeably with God. When the Jewish people came back from the Babylonian exile, they had picked up the language of Aramaic. And so when the Hebrew would be read in the synagogue, there would be a translator who would take that Hebrew and translate it into Aramaic. These were, for a long time, simply passed on by word of mouth, but then around the first century AD, they were put into writing. They are called the Targumim, the Targums. So in the Aramaic Targum, especially as I'm understanding it, Targum Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Targum, it means, or it says, the Memra said, and it's used interchangeably with God. As you read through it, it will say God said, and then it'll say the Memra said, the Word said. So Jesus Christ is seen by John as the eternal Memra, the eternal Word, the second person of the Holy Trinity, sharing equality with God the Father. So, what a beautiful beginning that John is alluding back to Genesis 1, seeing Christ as the agent of creation, as the light that continues to shine, and as the eternal Word in the second person of the Blessed Trinity.